The following program is made possible by Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
More than once over the centuries, the Catholic Church has found itself at a crossroads as an institution and a vehicle of faith for its millions of followers. And so it seems to be again, as cardinals gather in Rome to pick a new pope. We discuss this and more with former Catholic chaplain and a leading member of the Catholic laity, author Catherine Wolff. The game is religion, and the game is on. It has been nearly 6 centuries since a pope left that position while still alive. But the decision by Pope Benedict XVI to resign his office has brought into stark relief the difficult issues facing the Catholic Church as it wrestles with a widespread sexual abuse scandal, accusations of corruption, and the push for the Church to reflect the new realities of modern life and faith. Difficult issues, and we're fortunate to be joined for a discussion of them by Catherine Wolff, editor of Not Less Than Everything, Catholic Writers on Heroes of Conscience, from Joan of Arc to Oscar Romero, an anthology of essays on Catholicism, faith, and conscience. Fifth-generation Californian and a product of Bay Area parochial schools, Wolff has long been active in the Catholic community at Stanford, serving in several leadership positions and as chaplain and also as director of the Pedro Arrupe Center for the Community-Based Learning at Santa Clara University. Catherine Wolff, welcome. Thank you for being here. We were talking off there about ex-pope. It's not something you hear very often. There aren't a lot of those guys around. What do you think will be his, let's look backwards a little bit first. What do you think will be Pope Benedict's legacy and his what people will remember him for?
Well, while saying it's far too soon to make a judgment, everybody is doing so. I think that the resignation itself was a monumental act that we're only beginning to see the meaning of. It's an extraordinary thing for a pope to resign and to do it in such a way, such a humble way, where he came forth and said the church is facing such difficult issues that I really am not able to bear them at this point, and I do not have the capacity. And it was a humble act, and I think a wise one, but it also took Catholics aback, because I think it, particularly having watched John Paul II go through the agony of his decline and death, it took years. It was a heroic sort of public display of suffering. And it's almost as though we're surprised that a pope steps back. I mean, isn't a pope supposed to stay till they die?
You didn't know you had that as an option.
That's right.
Yeah.
Is it an office, or is it something that once you become pope, you're pope forever? Well, evidently, it's an office.
Well, and which is funny because in many ways, Pope Benedict was one of those who tried to invest the office with an authority that would suggest it's something given to you by God. It's not something you can just decide, I'm done now, thanks very much, I'm going to move on.
Well, I think you have that authority vested in you while you are in the office.
So it's the office that has the authority.
What he's saying is, no, I am just a humble pilgrim.
Yeah.
And he walked away.
It's interesting because one of the phrases he used a while ago, the waters were agitated and the winds are blowing against the church. And I was struck by that because it also suggests that was that he was pope during a very turbulent time, and the resignation suggests he doesn't think he's equal physically to the task that's facing the church about what has to be done next.
Well, you have to remember that Benedict came in 1981 to be the head of the Congregation of Faith, and so he has been in power in one way or another in the Vatican for a very, very long time. He didn't become Pope until 2005. I'm sorry, I should have said the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith. Right. But he, in that capacity, had dealt with a raft of issues, everything from theologians whom he considered to be dissident, that he silenced, to the sex abuse scandal that was just bubbling up and becoming more and more widespread. And so that it's not just his papacy. I think we have to look at that very long, several decades where he was responsible
for some really difficult issues.
Yes.
I want to talk for a moment, because it sets the stage for the rest of the topics about your book, Not Less Than Everything. We have a screenshot of it so people can go get it on Amazon or anywhere else they want. It's essays by people talking about their own heroes of conscience, their own people who stood up, people who sort of took a risk and may have been branded heretics. Some of them became saints. And it's an interesting history. It's an interesting personal view of the history of the church. But the title, which is a line from one of T.S. Eliot's massive poems of Four Quartets.
Yeah.
And having read it, I don't know if I could explain what the phrase means in that context, but it strikes me in the book and in the context of the church that there's no reason we shouldn't expect everything the church is supposed to be. That's how I interpreted the title. Why did you choose that phrase?
It was my sense, well, from the Eliot poem, it's
Sure.
a condition of complete simplicity costing not less than everything.
Right.
It was this single-mindedness that you see in the lives of the subjects of the essays, that these were people who held the faith so dearly, with such courage and with such kind of clear-sightedness, that they pursued it despite being very much at odds with the institutional church, sometimes even being persecuted.
Mm-hmm. And the idea is that this is the standard the church should be held to. We're going to insist that the church is held to that standard. This is our view of what the church should be. I'm committed to that view as a righteous view.
I would say that's the standard that I would aspire to if I wanted to be a saint,
Yeah.
if I were able to be that courageous. I think one of the points of the book was to demonstrate that dissent, difference of opinions, sort of structures that may not work together very well, to point that out is not to fly in the face of tradition or to dishonor it. It really is the tradition.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the church has changed over the last 2,000 years in so very many ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so this view that there's one church, one way to be, one liturgy, one set of doctrines, that's just not the case. And it's these people who provided the church in a good way with an opportunity to refine its teachings.
Yeah. We have to get into the issue of the abuse scandal, the sex abuse scandal, and from an outsider's perspective, it looks as though the church has not only not handled as well, in many ways it looks as though it hasn't handled it at all. And that, again, as an outsider's view, it looks as though it may be the issue that more threatens the church and its relationship with its congregants than almost anything else that I've seen in my lifetime.
I agree, and I think there's an ongoing problem, which is that I think you'd get 95% of the lay people who would say that, and the priests and the nuns, but there seems to be a kind of crust of the hierarchy that I don't really think they understand that yet.
Is it that they think, try and help me understand the mindset, because I can't imagine if you're in charge of an institution that has this particular crisis, and it so undermines the moral authority of the church, how could you not see it as something that has to be dealt with in the strictest terms possible, as quickly as possible?
Well, I think the behavior of abuse was so troublesome and to those who discovered it, that they felt that if this was exposed, that the reputation of the church would be blown. It's not, I have no patience, having been a clinical social worker for many, many years and dealt with so many cases of sexual abuse. I have no patience with people who say in the 80s, late 70s, 80s, 90s, we didn't know. We did know. There were laws on the books. Practitioners had to report.
Hold that thought. I have to stop you there. We're going to take a quick break.
Okay.
Don't go away, and you guys stick around too. We'll be right back with Catherine Wolff.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back to The Game. I'm Mark Simon. We're joined by Catholic laity leader, author, editor, Catherine Wolff, whose book, Not Less Than Everything, talks about the heroes of conscience in the Catholic Church, essays by a number of really well-known and capable writers. I can't think of the right word. We're talking about the abuse scandal. We talked about the existence of the scandal itself and how it undermines the church at this particular time as the challenge it's facing and as the cardinals gather to pick a new pope. And we were talking about, I have a background as a political reporter. It's almost always never the incident, it's the cover-up.
Absolutely. And that, I think, is what remains so painful and even still mysterious to so many Catholics, is that we've come to understand that these behaviors do exist. What we don't understand is that the allegiance that the clerical caste felt among itself was so great that it took precedence over their allegiance to the least among us, to the children and to the families. If they had managed to cover the situation up while taking care of people, perhaps that would have been a little bit better, but I don't agree. I think the truth will out. And I think also that I know that we've had a whole set of very clear laws in this country in terms of mandatory reporting, and they were not followed by the church.
Well, and you go back years. There's the Coyne report. I mean, there's a number of reports in different countries where there are significant Catholic populations, and the outrage is that people knew about this 5-10 years ago and said they were going to do something, and then haven't done something that's substantive.
Sure.
They'll transfer people, and apparently a transfer seems to be the stock answer to these issues.
Well, and that's what nobody can seem to get an answer is, why is it that none of the bishops who covered this up have been sanctioned in any way? There's a bishop in Kansas City, Bishop Robert Finn, who was convicted of a misdemeanor of not reporting child pornography on the part of one of his priests, and there's been absolutely no gesture towards reprimand. No comment at all. And that's really disturbing to us.
Well, and it stands in stark contrast to where the church has gone in terms of its stated relationship with its members, which is a neoconservative church, which is the expectations, no, you can't do certain things. This is the dogma. This is what we expect in terms of your adherence to it. It is very strict. Mm-hmm. So there's that contrast, it seems to me, between those who are saying, here are the rules and you have to follow them, but once you reach a certain level in the church, they don't apply to us.
The great gap between the faith that is preached and the faith that is lived.
Yeah. It's got to be troubling, and yet you've seen more centralized power in a diffuse and increasingly diverse era. Mm-hmm. I guess the question is, what are we going to do? I mean, how does the church survive? I guess that's why who they pick as the Pope is really going to be...
This is a crucial moment. I feel like you read a history book and you think, oh, I wish I could have been there. Yeah. But we are here now, and we're watching these proceedings unfold in real time. Yeah. Hans Kung had a great editorial in the New York Times yesterday talking about how this monarchical, highly centralized papacy really didn't come into being until the second millennium.
Right.
Okay. Maybe in this beginning of the third millennium that we need to get back to a kind of more collegial form of government in the church, which has always been there as an ideal, but it's never been carried out. You look at the Council of Constance, they tried to make reform so that governance would come about through councils. Certainly that would be in the 1400s. Right. The Vatican II, obviously, in the 1960s. It's full of magnificent documents, Lumen Gentium, and in particular where, the laity are called upon to take their rightful place and to really exercise their obligation in terms of their role in the church, which does have to do with its mission, with shepherding its mission. No structures were ever put in place. And so those sorts of dreams that we had sort of withered. Well,
and if it's the same piece I'm thinking of, it was the one where talked about the Arab Spring, and maybe this was the opportunity
for
the Vatican Spring.
That's right.
You do understand the church reacting to increased liberality in social behaviors and social mores, and think of itself as a moral structure that people should adhere to. And that seems to be more prevalent when we turn over a century, that there's this liberality that makes conservatives uncomfortable. How does the church adapt to that?
Well, I do think that there has to be, I think we really have to take a very long step back and look at some very practical issues. For instance, what's going on in the Curia. Everybody agrees it's a mess. You don't have to be a liberal or conservative to acknowledge that.
The Curia meaning?
That is the very insular bureaucracy that is in Vatican City that supports the Pope. Okay?
Right, it's the infrastructure.
It is the infrastructure. That has to happen. But I think in terms of doctrine, in terms of what the church teaches, that we really need to open up ways simply to speak with each other. Now, 10 years ago, if you'd asked me, what would you want? I would say, we got to talk about contraception, we have to talk about women priests, blah, blah, blah. Now, I just think we have to find ways to speak with each other. For that very reason that I was saying before, where so many of the ideas expressed by the people in the book eventually became the teachings of the church. But there was a kind of dynamic tension. Sometimes there was suppression and suffering. But the church did have to engage their ideas, and the church eventually grew through those ideas that they absorbed. And I just think for the last many years, and Cardinal Ratzinger really, when he was at the CDF, was very harsh, I will say, in suppressing any number of liberation theologians, clerics, bishops, who may have stepped out of line in some way in his perception. And so there has been for a very long time a sense that you really cannot speak up. And that in itself is an act of disloyalty.
How appropriate. Let me stop you there.
Okay.
We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. Stick around. Stay with us.
Good time.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back to the game. I'm Mark Simon. We're delighted to be joined by Catherine Wolff, author and Catholic expert. She's our resident Catholic expert. Thanks for being here. We were talking about the church changing. And of course, its reputation is that it's rigid, and its reputation for that has gotten stronger during Pope Benedict and Pope John Paul II as well, really. But as we were talking before the show, if you look over the long history, and it's a long history, the church has been pretty good at adapting when it really had to. And that's really one of the main themes of your book, is that people can change the church, especially if they're willing to really risk a great deal to do so. You think we're at one of those crossroads again? That's how I introduced the show.
Yes, I do, and I hope we take advantage of it. I just really pray that the cardinals going into the conclave, many of them have been complicit in the cover-up. You know, many of them have had questionable financial dealings. So they are sinners, just like the rest of us. And I just hope that they recognize that we are in a moment where they need, as wonderful John the 23rd said, to, throw open the windows. Just let that air come in, the fresh air. And that has to do with being able to listen. I think I was talking about that before, is how we just need to start talking to each other. So many things need to be addressed, and yet if we don't come to a point where we are respectful with each other and committed to really listening to each other for a really long time before we promulgate all kinds of doctrine, that's not what is going to work right now. There's a move that Pope Benedict was supporting in the last couple of years, a a new evangelization. And it seems to me at this point, the most effective new evangelization would not be to come down hard on doctrine or to say, this is who can be in the church and who can't. We are a smaller, purer church. These are things people say. I think that the best kind of evangelization would be for the church to take a time, 5, 10 years, and really look to its roots. And in some sense, to clean up its house, to make sure that the people who are in charge have the utmost integrity and that the systems are transparent and accountable, and that all voices are heard. There needs to be some sort of structure whereby, I don't know whether you're in Mali or San Mateo or Iceland, that your voice will be heard. And I don't care how long it takes. I think that would be a wonderful witness for the church to say, we need to do this. We need, actually, it's as a form of repentance for what has gone before. We need to be quiet, be humble, to pray with each other, to focus on what unites us and not what divides us, and to listen.
But wouldn't that invite, the expectation of people who are listened to is that they'll be heard. And wouldn't that invite some changes? Celibacy of priests is clearly one of the things that's making it difficult for the priesthood to sustain itself in terms of new members. I don't know if that's part of what's at the heart of the sex abuse scandal. I think those are really two entirely different issues. But that's one of those reforms that people talk about, but I don't think anybody, even if the church is to listen on that subject, I don't think anybody expects that change to take place in our lifetime anyway.
You see cracks, though. You know, there's that great Leonard Cohen line. He says, there's a crack in everything. Yeah. That's how the light gets in. And here and there, you'll see a cardinal or a bishop say, maybe we should start talking about that. Yeah. And when one of them says that sort of thing out loud, you kind of wonder whether there's not more discussion going on underneath. It is a crying need. People speak of the Eucharistic famine. If you travel as a Catholic, it's very often that you can't find a church to go to on Sunday. And I can't imagine that the celibacy of male priests is more important to Jesus than having people come to his table.
Yeah, and you were talking about inclusion and listening. I mean, that is part of the message of Jesus, is everybody is welcome. Yep. Sinners, all of us.
Yes.
And yet sometimes it doesn't seem that way. The other issue, of course, is the ordination of women, which are, it seems to me, the two biggest reforms people talk about that would be, some people would think would undo the very foundation of the church.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I certainly don't think that would be the case. I think there are two ways to think about. One would be, one is that, there's a great distortion in our tradition in that over half the populace has not had a voice. And so what has come to be does not accurately reflect who the church really is. You could talk about women slowly coming into positions of responsibility where it's not necessary to be ordained. There's a movement now based on excellent scholarship that says that would quite be legitimate for women to become deacons. Then there are the other people who say, don't follow that track. If we never ordain women as priests, they will never have a central position. They'll always be ancillary. They'll always be a kind of subset. So. Well,
but that's the way the church wants it, isn't it?
Right now?
Yeah.
Yes, probably. I don't know. I think people would probably make very lovely apologia about the position in the church and the position of women and how the church wants that sort of position to bloom, but it's always defined as a very narrow one. There was a papal theologian came out 2 weeks ago talking about how there couldn't be women priests because it had always been that way, that men were priests. And anyway, men had more of a proclivity to take care of things in a church, like fixing the roof. And I thought, well, it was so silly that it made me laugh, actually.
Give us your sense of what is a conclave like? Do you have a?
Who would know? Yeah, certainly nobody who looked like me.
They all gather in. I assume they're wearing their robes.
Conclave. It means with the key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And off they go.
Off they go. They are encouraged to disguise their signatures as they vote, so they're supposed to really keep their deliberations very, very quiet. It's hard to know how much they speak among each other within the conclave. I know there's all kinds of talk over the dinner table.
Do they bring in cell phones and text each other?
Well, they're certainly not going to have cell phones out to us, that's for sure. Yeah. Who knows? I think we'll find out. I think that they understand at this point that the world really is watching, that we are very curious about this. And my hope is that they rise to the occasion and that they are able to be more forthcoming and perhaps at a certain point to say these were the things that were discussed and this is, for these reasons this candidate emerged, so that we understand their deliberations and so that we may feel as though we were represented in a way that maybe we are being represented, but we just don't even know that.
Yeah. It's an exciting time for the Catholic Church,
It certainly is.
Catherine Wolff, thank you so much for being with us. This is a really fascinating topic, and you've been terrific in your helping us understand it.
Thank you.
And that's it for us. Join us next time on The Game. Thanks for being with us.